Good evening, and thank you for coming. Cascades Natural Burial is a local grassroots work group, and our 6 members are Susie Kowalczyk, Shirley Evans, Phoebe Hirschnow, Kate Wynn, Patty Pritchard, and me. Together, we're promoting natural burial as an alternative to conventional burial and cremation. Natural burial is traditional burial. It's the kind done by our ancestors since our earliest times. Our vision is that our education and promotion efforts will result in the development of a new natural burial ground right here in the Methow Valley. We're very grateful to the Methow Conservancy for this opportunity to discuss natural burial with all of you. In a variety of ways, we've been at this for a while. More correctly, Susie's been at this for a while. 15 years ago, Susie joined the County Cemetery Board to explore the possibility of adding green burial options in one of our existing cemeteries. After 7 years of trying, she was convinced that this would not be viable at either Beaver Creek or Sullivan cemeteries. Since then, both have adopted policies prohibiting natural burial. So what we have figured out we needed to do is start talking about it. And we've been visiting farmers markets and Earth Day events. We've visited Kiwanis, and we would love to visit any groups that you are involved with to share what we've learned about green burial and answer questions. Phoebe Hirschnow wove this beautiful basket that could be a burial basket, and it turns out to be a great conversation starter at the events we've been to. Along the way, we've learned a lot about what's happening in natural burial nationwide, and we've made some valuable connections with others who want to help. We believe that many in our community of the Methow will identify with natural burial as being consistent with their values around being one with nature and their love of this place. We'd like to ground our evening with one family's story. It's a really touching story of one family's journey with natural burial for their father and husband, who was very much an outdoors person. And like many of us, this was what he wanted for his final resting place. His final resting place was White Eagle Memorial Preserve near Goldendale. And it's my honor to introduce Jody Buller, White Eagle Cemetery Director, to share her vast knowledge about natural burial, how well established it is, and how things are done at White Eagle. Jody's been with White Eagle for 11 years, and she's a founding member of the National Conservation Burial Alliance. She's also part of a team that created community-centered, community-directed death care resource websites for Washington and Oregon. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you, Betsy. It's lovely to be here. I came up and visited with Susie and this group in 2018. I just was looking, and it's a project that I've been following along and hoping, fingers crossed, get some traction in your community. So thank you for inviting me. That video is a wonderful glimpse, and that was one of the first burials that White Eagle did. I think that was either 2009 or 2010. And we very much learned as we went, as I'll talk about a little bit more in my presentation. I've got some slides to share with you guys, and I will make that the PDF of the slideshow available to send out with the recording of this evening as well. But I think it speaks to, I'll come back around to this a number of times. One of the things that I find most inspiring and valuable about natural burial is the human scale of it. And it's very much humans helping other humans lay to rest in the earth, which, as you mentioned, Betsy, is not new. This is just a way of practicing something that humans have practiced for a long, long time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll just kind of see. It's about 7:15. Okay, I'm going to take about 15 minutes to talk through a little bit about what natural burial is on the national scale, and then also just what it looks like at White Eagle. So hang tight. Okay. So what we're looking at is my office, my workplace. This is the meadow in the center of White Eagle Memorial Preserve. And this was probably a traditional camas gathering grounds, camas harvesting grounds. The Camilpa people, who are now known as Rock Creek Band and are part of the Confederated Tribes and Nations of Yakima Nation, um, are indigenous to this land, and their longhouse is down at the mouth of where Rock Creek meets the Columbia River. So this is mostly ponderosa pine and Gary oak forest with some antelope bitterbrush in the mix, and in the spring a profusion of wildflowers. There's lupin and balsam root and many flowers that I am not familiar with yet, but we've got native plant societies that have made us a regular spot on their spring hikes. Um, this is a map that's on the greenburialcouncil.org website, and they have a great list of both products, like whether that's green burial caskets or funeral homes that are familiar with this, and then also these three designations of natural burial grounds. There's a hybrid cemeteries, which are folks that have been practicing conventional burial, but will do natural burials. Sometimes they require a vault, so because they're still mowing lawns. Natural cemeteries are often designating a separate area and burying with burial mounds instead of flat ground, and then conservation cemeteries. And the Green Burial Council is a certifying body for North America, so there are plenty of places that are doing natural burial that may not be going through this certification, similar to folks who are growing produce organically but not seeking an organic certification. But the things that they most have in common are no embalming, no other toxic chemicals used for landscaping and things like that. All the burial containers, shrouds or caskets or baskets are biodegradable. And one of the big ones is providing clients and families with the opportunity to participate. I feel like people are really drawn to natural burial for kind of values aligned ecological and environmental reasons. But one of the things that I am most moved by is what happens when families step in and participate and act as pallbearers and help with the lowering and the closing of graves, and what kind of palpable impact that has on people's grieving processes and their connections to each other and their ways of honoring their loved ones. So in 2020, we helped create this Washington Funeral Resources and Education website, and it has a list of about 8 stories, just sort of examples of families that did lean in this way to some degree. There is a continuum with this. Definitely professional help is so valued, and funeral directors can be incredible resources for families during grief times, as well as death doulas and other kind of end of life support people. But it also has a bunch of really practical how to do body care, how to do paperwork, how to like what are the things to think about. And it's got a lot of links to what Washington specific laws are. Laws often tell you what is not allowed. They don't really articulate what is allowed. And I think that's really true with natural burial, is a lot of people don't know that they can be so participatory in having a home funeral or driving their loved one out to a cemetery in a private vehicle, or being hands-on in this way. So just wanted to highlight this as a resource, washingtonfuneral.org. And again, this death care continuum can look like 100%, somebody dies at home and their family cares for them at home and they drive out to a crematorium or to a cemetery, or it can be a mix. Washington State's paperwork is the burial transit permit in particular is often done through a software program that funeral directors have. So if this is something that you're drawn to, I think it makes sense to do some research ahead of time and talk to your county clerk and make sure that they've got the paper copies of the paperwork, and that it's not just all on a computer for professionals. There's no right way to do it, but it's good to know what the options are. The Washington Funeral Site is sort of a child site of this Lee Webster's New Hampshire Funeral Resources and Education. And this is a real storehouse of presentations and resources. And then she keeps an up-to-date list of all the green burial cemeteries in the US and Canada on this website. That's nhfuneral.org. And this is one of the slides that I found on her website. It's just looking at what the growth of natural burial in the US and Canada. The blue is US and Canada combined, and the green is the US, and then the orange or red is New England. She's based in Vermont. And so it shows a pretty steep in 1997, there were none. 1998, Billy Campbell started a burial ground in South Carolina and has been a real big Memorial Ecosystems is the name of their business effort. If you want to look them up, he's got a bunch of articles that he's written. And at this point, as of November, there are 475 places in the country that will, and Canada, that will bury you naturally, whether that's hybrid, primarily they're hybrids, natural burial grounds, and then conservation burial grounds. And so what distinguishes conservation burial is often a partnership with a land trust organization and a conservation easement on the land that is often held by a land trust. This can take a number of different shapes, but there is often a wider effort to conserve and restore and steward larger parcels of land in conjunction with natural burial, and natural burial can become a revenue stream for both the cemetery itself and the land trust organization that they're partnered with. We started the Conservation Burial Alliance in 2017. There were, I think, 10 conservation burial grounds at the time. And we were all getting a bunch of requests from other communities who wanted this in their area, and we weren't close enough. And so that's how this started. And so tried to really just be a resource for other efforts and for operating natural burial grounds, just in terms of best practices. So lots of good information on this website. Here's another picture of my workplace. This is Rock Creek Canyon. We call that the Eagle Wing. It's a reclaimed metal sculpture. And we are down where the green arrow is, south of you all on 97, almost to the Columbia River. And this map on the right is the Sacred Earth Foundation, which is a 501c3 land trust organization. That's a land stewardship organization that runs summer camps for kids and had been doing that for 20 years. And then when the founder died pretty suddenly in 2007, the community knew that they needed to bury him on this land that he had spent his life working to steward and preserve. And so because we were a land trust organization, because we were a nonprofit and could fundraise, we were able to designate the little white rectangle there, kind of in the top middle, 20 acres to be a cemetery. And we buried Ray Mitchell in the spring of 2008. It was a labor of love and pretty powerful. But there are about 1,260 acres that are in stewardship in general right now. And the little clearing circle, you probably can't see my cursor, but the Coney Ranch Valley here is still running summer camps for kids and land-based programs. And in conjunction with that, we are running a cemetery. So we laid a grid on that 20 acres of land that the area in the center there is that wildflower meadow that I showed at the beginning. The grid lets us give people site numbers and file folders and keep track of where people are. But what we're really working with is this forest, is this land. So each of those little blue squares is a 20 by 20 theoretical potential place to bury somebody. We do what's called low density burial. So what we're really trying to do is not impact this intact ecosystem here. We're trying not to cut roots of these hundreds of year old trees. But we're also trying to be a functioning business that knows where people are, where we've buried people and are able to track those things. So that's how we're approaching it. What it looks like on the land is this. So this is the morning of a burial, and we often will go into the garden and gather greeneries, whatever's kind of in bloom. And we'll lay a layer of duff at the base of a grave. We are digging these graves by hand primarily. Occasionally in the winter, if we need to bring a small excavator out, we will do so. We're going 3.5 to 4 feet deep. We're trying to work where the microbial activity is still alive in the soil. This is really rocky soil. We have a pretty basalty volcanic underlayer here. So we're using dig bars and pickaxes, and we have an electric hammer drill. But it's a lot of arm and back power also. So we're laying duff down at the base of the grave, and then we're making beauty. And that's really one of my most treasured rituals on the day of a burial. It helps me get centered and grounded and ready to receive the family that's coming. And the people come sometimes in funeral home vehicles and sometimes in the back of horse trailers. This is Leslie, and her sister and her had horses, and her sister stayed up the night before to decorate their horse trailer, and she came out with some of her medals and the saddle and some fresh flowers, and then we transferred her out of the purple drapery and into this ponderosa pine milled casket. And it's got rope handles and a little bit of wood burning. The little butterflies are wood burned, but we're not using a lot of synthetic materials in the creation of this. And it was really meaningful for her sister to do that labor of love and ride her out for her last miles. We're also burying people in shrouds. One of our founding stewards, Chris, makes really beautiful custom shrouds, sometimes with people's family quilts. We have a basket, a woven basket we call a soul boat. Mo Walrath, who's out on the Olympic Peninsula, weaves these beautiful willow casket baskets. And we transfer onto a wheeled cart, and we walk the person out graveside. Generally, it's an invitation to the family again at this point to help with the transferring and to help with the walking out and with the lowering. Speaking of rocky soil, this is a woman's nephew and two of our home crew who are helping to close her grave, and just kind of gives you a little bit more sense of the forest there. This was a burial a few winters back, and what the woman is doing is pouring some water in over a native wildflower and grass mix. We have a really custom mix that we offer to people to sprinkle on the grave mounds. And we're then going to layer in some more of the pine needles and oak leaves that you see in the right-hand picture, kind of to cover the top of that grave mound. The picture on the right is really a beautiful kind of indication of both the labor and also the joy. And we're doing a very similar, simple act with each burial, but each one is so unique, and really kind of evocative of the person that we're saying goodbye to or laying to rest. In this case, this fellow was a musician, and so his brothers were singing some of his songs, and people were having some good singing. Threshold choirs also will sometimes come out for natural burials. Those are groups of people who will sing like at hospice or bedside, but sometimes they'll come out for burials too. So then this is an example of a couple of kind of tended mounds. Sometimes they're ringed in pine cones or stones. We use some of the greenery and flowers that we use to decorate around the grave on top of this grave mound here. We also do have marker stones that are engraved. We just ask that they be rock-shaped rocks, and that they kind of fit in with the general landscape. We're trying not to glare up the forest with plastic things or tombstones. And then this is the picture on the left I just love. This is one of our reservation markers. It's a rebar with wood and then copper stamped with the person's name and their site number. And this is someone who came out to pick a spot a few years back, and she's since come back out for work parties and otherwise. And I will often ask people to show me what direction they want to be facing, because we're not all lined up in straight rows. So she had this stick that she laid down, and then she decided she'd give it a try and see how it felt, that angle of repose. And then this final picture is a rainbow after a burial last year. I walk people out to the Eagle Wing at the canyon just kind of to give us all time to take some big deep breaths. So that's what I've got to share. Kind of a quick glimpse. I'm happy to answer any questions that get evoked sort of after at the conclusion of this. But there's a glimpse into my world, what natural burial looks like for us.
Thank you so much, Jody. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to go back to my screen. So where do we go from here? What our group realized is that we need basically two things. We need partners and we need a place. And then we need actually three things, a stewardship plan to take care of that place. We were very excited to get to know Patrick and Glenn from River Valley Funeral Home in Okanagan. Patrick and Glenn are both fifth generation Okanagan County and Colville Indian Reservation residents. They've been friends since junior high. Glenn has been a funeral director at River Valley for the last 20 years, and he built the first local crematorium in the county, sorry. Patrick specializes in monument design, veteran services, and is a Marine Corps combat veteran. A few years ago, they bought the funeral home and cemetery in Okanagan. They care about this place and are very interested in what we're proposing. They're sensitive to the different operational considerations of natural versus conventional burial. And most importantly, they're prepared to commit to this project. I'd like to give Glenn a few minutes to tell you about their organization and introduce themselves. So Glenn, welcome.
Hi, Patrick couldn't be here. I apologize. Here in his stead, of course. We love everything about this. Like I've been doing this for a really long time, and the attitude, in addition to the environmental aspect of this, is really it's really nice to see. Like in practice, we deal with the Native American community a lot. We of course live on the reservation. I'm talking to you from about 30 miles into it, where I live, and the attitude, the hands-on kind of attitude is something that I think is very, very important for the healing process. I've experienced it myself with the death of my own father a few years ago, and I've been doing this long enough where when you see people come in and then they participate in getting their family ready and stuff, you can almost see it on their face like a sense of relief when they're ready to leave. I've never had anybody in 20 years that said they regretted doing that. And I think that's really, really important. I think it's really important for the community in general to have that option. Like even somebody with the resources that I have, as far as knowing people at cemeteries and stuff. When my own dad died, there wasn't any place that was close, like Jody said, because that's what he wanted. And what we did is the closest thing we could at the time, which was we had a home funeral and brought him out here, got him a pine casket, sat with them, and then afterwards we ended up cremating him so we could bury him on the ranch. And it's really exciting to talk about this because I think we put our heads together, we can get this done. So I appreciate you asking me to be here.
Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah.
So this is where you come in. We're looking for land. The ideal site is about 20 acres. It's not on floodplain. It's not solid rock. It's accessible by road. And it's welcomed by its neighbors. And after that, everything else is determined by the land and its location. It would be a place that welcomes not only the burial of our, sorry, 1 second, the burial of our dead, but also becomes a place that's integrated into our lives as a place to visit, have memorials, and maybe even a picnic or a walk. So we're hoping you leave tonight feeling inspired to help make natural burial ground in the Methow Valley a reality. The more people who know about this project, the greater the odds that the right piece of property will become known to us. Please reach out if you know of a willing landowner that would like to talk to us. You can help by sharing what you learned here, inviting us to speak at your groups, or by joining us. Thank you again for sharing your time with us this evening, and we look forward to your questions and comments. That's it.
All right. Well, let's see. We do have a question in the chat asking about what is it that the cemeteries have prevented when they prevent natural burials. And I know Jody listed kind of the quick list of what a natural burial typically entails, but maybe we could, yeah, sort of review that and go a little deeper on why a cemetery might say no and what they're saying no to.
Jody, do you want to start or would you like us to take that?
Yeah, I can't speak to your particular area cemeteries or what their logic is. I can say that um there can be death phobia in general in our culture, and there can be resistance to change. And often existing cemeteries that have been practicing conventional burial only are maybe working with landscaping machinery that they are concerned they would maybe be concerned that they couldn't continue to do their business as usual, maybe.
Right.
Often that's a thing with the burial mounds that, you're not gonna mow that lawn, and it might be more complicated. I think there are traditionally some longstanding partnerships with vault companies also. And so just it's kind of a like scratch on the record to try to ask folks that have been doing something conventionally in this one way for some time to look at it from a different angle. Those are my 3 cents worth.
Thank you. We have another question here that says, I read that there needs to be testing of the body for toxins before burial. And curious if that is true.
To my knowledge, that is not true. I do get a lot of people who are maybe have a cancer diagnosis and are in treatment for radiation or chemotherapy, who are interested in natural burial but are concerned they don't want to poison the land. And that to me is heartbreaking. And what I will tell them is that mycelial systems are the best remediators of chemicals that we know of. And part of the reason that we're doing low density burial is to not overload the soil, but that soil is a really excellent remediator.
Let's see. And then we have a question that I think a lot of people will have, which is, are natural burials allowed on any private land? And I think the answer is no, based on the story that Glenn was telling, but that's something I wondered and had in my notes I think a lot of people I talk to are like, well, I'd love to be buried in the backyard, that
Right.
kind of and so curious what the barriers are to doing that.
Yeah, in our case, it is state statute. It is legal in Oregon to be buried in your backyard, as long as your backyard is 5 acres or more and you get a deed. I can't remember what the terminology is, but you register that with the deed on the land so that anyone who's maybe purchasing that land in the future knows that it comes with a family cemetery.
Right.
I know it's legal also in Texas. I don't know what the specifics are around size of the land to allow it. So
Yeah.
it's a state by state thing.
I
In
can
Washington,
add,
you got to be a cemetery.
yeah, and I can add that there was a piece of legislation introduced in Washington State, if not the last session, the session before, and it did not pass, that would allow burial on private land. So I anticipate that it'll be reintroduced.
Sounds good. And then we have a question that we also thought we might hear, which is there a role for the Medhow Conservancy to help with land acquisition and land for natural burial? And I think our answer is that, we're interested in learning more about this, which is part of why we host events, right? That's the beauty of our education programs is we get to learn along with you. And we're just, right at the beginning of all this, just like many of us learning here. Let's see. And then we had a question also about burial depth. And that, most of the soil biology is happening up high, but then we obviously have the classic 6 feet under moniker. Is that the reason for the mound, is keeping people as high as possible, or can you tell us more about the soil biology component?
I'm an English major, so I can't speak to the soil biology component in any detail, but I can tell you that one of the concerns people have with natural burial is animal intrusion. And so the 3.5 to 4 feet is a significant smell barrier and seems to keep those graves uninteresting to animals, except I will just give you all this caveat for squirrels. So the main intrusion that I see is squirrels putting, and we're in an oak forest, is squirrels putting acorns in the loose earth of the burial mounds and kind of making little tunnels and bits. They're not getting very far down, but it is real. Squirrels. That was unanticipated for me. Part of my job dynamic. But other than that, like for us, the soil deeper than 4 feet is just rock. And like you say, that kind of negates the purpose of a natural burial. We do notice that the grave mounds will subside over time, as the physical form of the body recomposes into the earth. So we don't find that being that deep is a barrier to recomposition.
Perfect. And then someone's wondering about pricing, perhaps as it compares to a traditional funeral. And then a few other questions about the process, the time frame from death to internment, and then also questions about, what if I have an artificial shoulder? Is any of that of concern? So maybe, if you want to
You might
address
have to
those
reprompt me on
process.
some of that. That was couple different things.
I'm happy to. Pricing was the first one.
Okay. Yeah. So a burial at White Eagle costs $4,000 all told, $3,000 for the interment rights. Another 300 goes into an endowment care fund for the in perpetuity part of the cemetery. And then our open and closed burial fee is $700. And we do have folks who are pre-planning and doing, paying it off on a 3-year payment plan. And then we've got folks who are finding us after someone has died, kind of runs the gamut. What was the next one?
The time frame from death to actually being in the earth.
Yeah. I feel like one of the things that people are concerned about with natural burial is that it's going to have to be really fast. And I try and really slow folks down as much as I can. With a home funeral, generally the timeline between death and transport to a cemetery is about 3 days. That seems sort of to be also in conjunction with when somebody's life force has left its vessel. And gives people some time to come and visit and things. If you're working with the funeral home and they're holding the body in shelter, it can be weeks and occasionally months. Generally, I think the most, and maybe you can speak to this too, Glenn, it feels like
Yeah.
The sweet spot, so to speak, is between a week to 2 weeks. That gives people enough time to get death certificate
Yeah.
and do all the paperwork things and then notify everybody and
Yeah.
let it begin to sink in.
Yeah.
And also for people to make plans to travel and we can and have done burials within the first 24 hours. Sometimes people's spiritual practices ask for that. But it doesn't need to be rushed. And if you're working with a funeral home that is familiar with green burial, especially in the winter time, it can take longer. There may be
Mhm.
snow on the ground or storms in the pass, or we did have a burial a few years ago, a woman who'd come out in the fall, and I'd been talking with her about the wildflowers in the spring, and she ended up dying in the end of February, but she had talked with her partner about how she wanted to be buried when the wildflowers were blooming. And so they worked with a funeral home who understood and could support that, and we buried her mid-end of April, and that was okay. But I do feel like if that's not the set intention and that's not like the honoring of someone's wishes, that that would be feel like maybe in the grieving process too long of a stretch.
Yeah.
How does that sit with you, Glenn?
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. I was going to say, a lot of times people think that they have to get somebody buried right away because funeral homes didn't used to have refrigeration a lot of times. I mean, most of the time they didn't. When I first started working, we practically embalmed everybody. But now that we have refrigeration, we keep the body at about 38 to 42 degrees, and that gives you time. Like you can get family to fly in from out of town, and you can wait a couple weeks. You could, I, a couple weeks is really the sweet spot, I think, as far as what you want to do there. Currently, the law is that you're not supposed to have the body outside of refrigeration for more than 24 hours. So if you were picked up by a funeral home and refrigerated, uh, then, the clock wouldn't start on that 24 hours until we actually took you to the cemetery or you came in to do the dressing, and then we could place you back in refrigeration until we could make it to the cemetery. Like there's ways to do it where you can have some time and really go through the healing process like you should.
Yeah. I feel like what you were saying, Glenn, there's something about what gets what can get kind of hitched up or stopped in the grieving process when if somebody dies and you're like, got to call the funeral home right away, and then they get there and then they take the person away, and it's
Yeah,
like there's a suddenness in that process, which I don't feel is very helpful to grieving in general.
no, I totally agree with you. Yeah, yeah, it's totally. Most people don't understand that you can't actually just you don't have to call us right away. You know, technically you're supposed to go in that 24-hour period, but we're here to help you with whatever you want to do, and we'll help you do whatever you want to do. So we'll make recommendations. Yeah.
And then we have a few questions about alternatives to burial that are presumably also green. Like I know certain folks are interested in aquamation, and there's talk of composting in the state of Washington now that that's legal. Is that part of the green burial conversation? Is these sort of green alternatives?
It has become part of the green burial conversation, but these are more technically alternative dispositions to cremation. They're forms of cremation.
Mm.
But there's a little bit of blurring in the way all the language has been presented. Um, and yeah, so both aquamation, which is in a tube, I'll just say real quick for folks who may or may not know, in a metal tube with hot water and potash, kind of a
Yeah.
warm dissolution of the tissues, and you're left with bone, and that then goes through a cremulator similar to flame cremation, and then you receive generally it's a little bit more in volume and different color than cremation
Hmm.
remains. And then terramation or human composting, which is also in a tube with alfalfa and other organic materials and a process of time. It's about 2 months, I think. And then what is produced is basically a cubic yard, so a truck bed full of material, which
Yeah.
is soil-like material. And people are definitely asking if they can be terramated and then buried at White Eagle. And what we've been saying is like we can receive a symbolic amount, but we can't bury a truckload full of soil. So
Right.
often the remainder of that soil is going down to places with land that is more in need of like remediation. In our case, we're a pretty intact system and can't really accommodate all of that. There are, I believe, 2 terramation places. Both of them are in Seattle. One's called Return Home. One's called Recompose. Recompose is the effort of Katrina Spade, who got the legislation pushed through in Washington and other places. And so if that's a choice for you, a driver will come and pick you up and drive you to Seattle for that process.
Yeah.
And that's often something funeral homes can help to arrange.
Facilitate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, maybe let's end on an easy one, and then I'll turn it back over to Betsy in case she has final remarks. But are there issues with artificial joints?
Not issues. We look at that as kind of an inert material. Things like pacemakers. I've just been having a conversation with somebody who has Parkinson's and has a like implant in their brain and a battery pack, and we're asking that be removed. But otherwise, the titanium is not gonna. It's not gonna have an impact that spreads to impact the or to harm the forest. So.
Yeah.
Then we talk about incidental metals sometimes, and those include things like Harley Davidson keys that somebody's father-in-law wanted to put in with him because he had always loved that motorcycle. These are not things that are going to have any kind of an impact on the land, but they make a huge difference in the grief process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Glenn, are there other things that you get
Well,
asked to remove?
There's only so far that they'll let us go legally for that kind of thing. Like pacemakers, kind of it sounds similar to cremation. We do have to remove that. That's got some toxic stuff in it, and for cremation, it will explode. But as far as like knee joints, hip joints, and all that kind of stuff, that sounds like pretty standard stuff. Dental things, we're not supposed to do anything with that. That would be illegal. You can't do that. You could hire a dentist. You cannot ask a funeral home to do that. And if they offer, you should definitely tell somebody, go somewhere else. But but it sounds very similar to cremation. So.
All right. Any closing remarks, Betsy, before we send folks off for the night?
Just a reminder, come visit our website, cascadesnaturalburial.org. You can drop us a note there. Let us know if you'd like to join our efforts or ask us to come visit your group, or if you know of a piece of property that might be appropriate. And thanks again to Jody and Glenn for joining us and sharing all of your incredible expertise and experience. And thanks all of you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.